In today's video, we're diving into 3 of the worst chimp attacks of all time. From a wealthy Brazilian collector who ignored every warning sign, to a French photographer who tragically learned that raising a chimp can have deadly consequences. But first, we begin in a Bulgarian roadside zoo, where one man's corner-cutting habits would lead an employee into a brutal encounter with 2 agitated chimps. It was March 17, 2014, and the ramshackle roadside zoo on the outskirts of Plovdiv, Bulgaria, sat in darkness except for a single flickering security light that cast eerie shadows across the concrete enclosures. The facility, operating without proper permits for over 2 years, would soon become the site of a brutal mauling that would expose the dangerous corners cut by its desperate owner and the tragic fate of those who worked there. Stoyan Velchev was a 46-year-old former factory worker who had taken the night caretaker position 6 months earlier when the textile plant where he'd worked for 15 years finally closed. His wife said that with limited options and mounting bills, he accepted the job despite reportedly having no formal animal training. His employer, a cash-strapped businessman running the unlicensed zoo, paid him under the table and provided minimal supervision. Stoyan's colleagues at his previous job remembered him as someone who often looked for shortcuts, often skipping safety protocols to finish tasks faster. His previous colleagues said that the job suited Stoyan's preference for working alone, and his belief that animals were simple creatures that responded to firmness and routine. They said that he had developed his own methods for managing the facility's collection of exotic animals, often entering enclosures alone to clean or repair equipment, a practice that saved time but violated several basic safety protocols. His goal was straightforward: keep the animals fed and the enclosures minimally maintained, while avoiding any incidents that might draw unwanted attention from authorities. The zoo's precarious legal status meant that any serious problems could result in immediate closure and the loss of his desperately needed income. Common chimpanzees are among the most dangerous animals in captivity, possessing strength several times greater than an adult human despite weighing only approximately 80 to 160 pounds. Their powerful arms can exert tremendous force, while their large canine teeth, often exceeding an inch in length, are designed to tear flesh and cause severe trauma. Male chimps are particularly aggressive and territorial, especially when stressed or agitated, and can attack in socially coordinated ways. Earlier that day, feeding had been delayed by several hours due to a supplier issue, leaving the 2 adult male chimps visibly agitated. They had been pacing their enclosure, vocalizing loudly, and displaying aggressive posturing toward anyone who approached. The facility's daytime keeper had warned Stoyan about their mood when he arrived for his shift, suggesting he avoid unnecessary contact with them. Additionally, a water valve inside their enclosure had malfunctioned that afternoon, creating a necessary cleanup that needed to be addressed before morning when the few visitors might arrive. Around midnight, Stoyan decided to fix the water valve himself rather than wait for a proper repair crew. The enclosure featured a double gate system, a safety measure requiring 1 gate to be secured before opening the second. But Stoyan was reported to often bypass this protocol to save time. The inner gate's latch was partially bent from long-term corrosion, allowing it to be bypassed without fully locking. In grainy security footage, it appears to show him with his toolbox and a flashlight as he unlocked the outer gate and stepped directly into the chimp's territory without securing the barrier behind him. The 2 males, already agitated from the day's disruptions, immediately focused on this nighttime intruder in their space. The attack began the moment Stoyan knelt beside the broken valve. The larger of the 2 chimps, weighing approximately 150 pounds, rushed him with shocking speed, covering the 15-foot distance in less than a second. The animal's powerful hands grabbed Stoyan's left arm, yanking him off balance with such force that his shoulder resulted in dislocation. As he fell backward, the second chimp joined the assault, leaping onto his chest and immediately targeting his face with its massive canine teeth. The facial attack was devastating and precise. The chimp's jaws clamped down on Stoyan's nose, appearing to tear it away with a violent shake of its head. Blood poured from the wound as the animal continued its assault, biting through his lips and leaving ragged tears across his cheeks. Stoyan's screams echoed across the empty facility as he instinctively raised his hands to protect his head, only to have the first chimp seize his fingers in its grip. The apparent coordination of the attack is consistent with instinct, dominance hierarchy, and stress responses. While one continued mauling his face, the other systematically bit at the fingers of both hands, reportedly causing severe damage to several fingers. The animals' vocalizations, a mixture of aggressive barks and excited screeches, grew louder as they sensed their victims' weakening resistance. Stoyan's attempts to crawl toward the gate were futile. The chimps easily overpowered his movements, dragging him back toward the center of the enclosure. The most horrific phase of the attack involved severe trauma to the scalp area. The larger chimp gripped Stoyan's hair and began tearing at his scalp with both hands and teeth, an action witnesses described as removing large sections of tissue and exposing portions of the skull. The force required to inflict such damage illustrated the extreme upper body strength chimpanzees possess, as heavy bleeding continued until his movements ceased, while the chimps continued their relentless assault. After several minutes of continuous attack, Stoyan's movements ceased entirely. The chimps, their aggressive energy spent, lost interest once he became unresponsive, remaining nearby and occasionally prodding the body with their hands. The facility's only other employee, a part-time cleaner working in a building roughly 650 feet away, had heard the initial screaming through open service windows and the metal structures that carried sound across the yard, and called emergency services at 11:47 p.m. Police and paramedics arrived 11 minutes later, but Stoyan was pronounced dead at the scene. The coroner's preliminary report documented massive trauma to the head, face, and hands, with the cause of death listed as exsanguination due to multiple bite wounds. Specific injuries included complete avulsion of the nose, severe lacerations to both lips and cheeks, partial scalp removal exposing cranial bone, and traumatic amputation of multiple fingers. The report noted that the pattern of injuries was consistent with a focused, multi-animal primate attack. The incident received minimal media coverage, with local authorities treating it as an industrial accident rather than a criminal matter. An administrative labor safety inquiry was opened, but resulted only in minor citations due to the zoo's unlicensed status. The zoo closed quietly within 3 weeks, its animals relocated to licensed facilities across Eastern Europe. No charges were filed against the owner, who disappeared shortly after the closure, leaving behind only unpaid debts. While a factory worker's shortcuts had proven fatal in Bulgaria, a wealthy Brazilian agricultural distributor would discover that money couldn't buy respect from the chimpanzees during a feeding dispute. It was September 8, 2016, and the humid air of rural Paraná hung thick with the promise of another scorching Brazilian afternoon. In a converted barn on the sprawling Lemos estate, the screams that would soon echo across the property would mark the end of one man's dangerous obsession with proving that money could buy dominance over nature's most unpredictable creatures. Renato Lemos was a 58-year-old agricultural equipment distributor whose wealth had afforded him luxuries most could never imagine. His company dominated the soybean belt of southern Brazil. But Renato's true passion lay in his private collection of exotic animals, housed in custom-built enclosures across his approximately 400-acre estate. His social media accounts were filled with photos of himself, hand-feeding tigers, wrestling with pythons, and embracing various primates, images that earned him hundreds of followers who admired his apparent fearlessness. What they didn't see were the occasional citations from environmental authorities, the warnings from veterinarians, and the growing concern among his staff about his increasingly reckless behavior around the animals. Renato's crown jewel was a group of 5 chimpanzees he had acquired through black market dealers 3 years earlier. He housed them in a converted barn that he had modified with concrete floors, steel mesh barriers, and what he believed were adequate safety measures. Unlike legitimate sanctuaries that maintain strict protocols and multiple barriers between humans and primates, Renato's setup allowed routine direct human entry into the enclosure, a design flaw he considered a feature. He took pride in entering their enclosure personally for feeding time, often posting videos of himself distributing fruit while the chimps gathered around him. His groundskeeper, Miguel Realonso Santos, had repeatedly urged him to hire professional handlers, but he said that Renato dismissed such suggestions as unnecessary expenses for animals he claimed understood his authority. The converted barn sat at the edge of a eucalyptus grove, its metal roof reflecting the harsh afternoon sun as insects buzzed in the stifling air. What Renato failed to fully comprehend was the nature of the animals he kept as pets. In the wild, chimpanzees live in complex social hierarchies maintained through displays of aggression, and they are known to engage in brutal territorial warfare that can result in the dismemberment and death of rivals. Despite decades in captivity, these instincts may remain intact, making them among the most dangerous animals to keep in private collections. That afternoon, inspections had reportedly visited the property for a previously scheduled check, issuing at least one warning about Renato's inadequate safety protocols. Renato had signed the citation with visible irritation, complaining to Miguel about government interference in his private affairs. Earlier that week, Miguel had also reported unusual aggression among the chimps, particularly from the dominant male, Bruno, who had been displaying territorial behaviors and showing signs of stress. The animals had been more vocal than usual, with frequent screaming matches that echoed across the property. Despite these warning signs, Renato maintained his routine of personal feeding, viewing any change in protocol as an admission of weakness. As the afternoon feeding time approached, Renato gathered the usual assortment of fruits and vegetables, loading them into a wheelbarrow for transport to the barn. Miguel offered to accompany him, as he had done increasingly often in recent weeks, but Renato waved him off with characteristic dismissiveness. The groundskeeper watched from a distance as his employer unlocked the outer gate and wheeled the food into the enclosure's antechamber. Through the mesh barrier, the 5 chimpanzees could be seen gathering expectantly, eyes fixed on the approaching meal. What happened next would unfold with terrifying speed from Miguel's point of view. Renato entered the main enclosure, as he had done hundreds of times before, but today the dynamics were different. The youngest chimp, a 3-year-old female named Luna, approached the food aggressively, snatching a banana from the wheelbarrow before the others could reach it. When Bruno, the dominant male, moved to assert his authority, Luna let out a piercing scream of distress. In chimpanzee society, such vocalizations serve as alarm calls that can trigger immediate and violent responses from other group members. The sound activated the protective instincts of the other adults, who likely interpreted Renato's proximity to the screaming juvenile as a direct threat. The attack began without warning as Bruno charged from behind, his powerful arms wrapping around Renato's torso and driving him to the concrete floor with sudden, overwhelming force. Before Renato could react, the other adult chimps joined the assault, their territorial instincts fully engaged. The first bites targeted his face and scalp, the chimp's long canines tearing through flesh and muscle with ragged, crushing damage. Renato's screams mixed with the frenzied vocalizations of the attacking animals as he tried desperately to crawl toward the gate, leaving a trail of blood across the concrete. The chimp's attack followed patterns observed in wild territorial disputes, with multiple animals focusing on different parts of their victim's body. 2 females concentrated on his hands and arms, their powerful jaws inflicting severe crush injuries and partial amputations as Renato raised them in futile defense. Bruno maintained his grip on Renato's head and neck, his bites causing catastrophic soft tissue damage and uncontrolled bleeding. The businessman curled into a ball out of defense, but the chimp continued its aggression, requiring elimination. Within minutes, Renato's weakened as blood loss and trauma took their toll. The chimps, following instincts honed over millions of years of evolution, began dragging his body deeper into the enclosure during the ongoing assault, a behavior commonly observed during sustained chimpanzee attacks. Miguel reported that Bruno delivered a severe injury to Renato's throat, contributing to loss of consciousness due to cumulative trauma. The attack continued for several more minutes, even after Renato had stopped moving, the chimp's adrenaline-fueled aggression slowly subsiding only when they no longer perceived resistance. Miguel Santos witnessed the attack as it happened from a safe distance. He said that he was unable to intervene due to fear for his own safety. He called emergency services immediately while the assault was ongoing, relaying what he was seeing. Renato's screams, the chimp's aggressive vocalizations, and the sickening sounds of the attack were all audible to Miguel, providing him with a horrifying real-time account. By the time paramedics arrived approximately 19 minutes later, Renato was unresponsive. The coroner's preliminary examination revealed massive trauma to the head, neck, and extremities, with the cause of death listed as exsanguination due to multiple bite wounds and severe blunt force and crush injuries, particularly to the neck. Estimates later suggested death occurred several minutes earlier. The aftermath was swift and decisive. Environmental authorities seized all 5 chimpanzees within hours, transferring them to a legitimate sanctuary where they could be properly housed and cared for. The Lemos estate faced substantial fines for illegal animal possession, though the family's wealth and influence ensured the incident received minimal media coverage. Only a brief report in the regional newspaper mentioned Renato's death, describing it simply as a tragic accident involving exotic animals. The barn was demolished within weeks, and the estate was quietly sold to developers who converted it into a residential subdivision, erasing the last traces of one man's fatal attempt to dominate creatures that had never forgotten their wild nature. A Brazilian collector's wealth couldn't protect him from the chimpanzees he'd caged in his converted barn. And in France, a freelance photographer in a rural area would learn that raising a chimp-like family only delayed the moment when primal instincts would override years of misguided domestication. It was May 2nd, 2018, and the morning light filtered through the tall windows of the converted farmhouse in rural Provence, casting long shadows across the stone floors where Luc Perrin was about to discover that 7 years of treating an adolescent male chimpanzee as a family member would end with his blood pooling on his home tiles he had laid with his own hands. Luc Perrin was a 39-year-old freelance wildlife photographer who had built his career documenting human-animal relationships, though his colleagues increasingly questioned his methods. He had acquired Marcel as an infant chimpanzee in 2011, raising him alongside his son, Theo, in their renovated farmhouse outside Aix-en-Provence. Luc publicly insisted that Marcel was part of the family, posting videos online of the chimp eating at their dinner table, sleeping in a bedroom, and playing with Theo. His ex-wife had left 3 years earlier, citing Marcel's increasingly unpredictable behavior as one of several reasons for the divorce. She said that Luc dismissed her concerns as ignorance, maintaining that proper socialization eliminated any danger. He had given lectures at photography workshops about breaking down barriers between species for the opportunity of better shots. His reputation in the wildlife photography community was mixed. Some admired his intimate access to his subject, while others considered him reckless and irresponsible. Multiple veterinarians had warned him that Marcel's behavior was becoming territorial and aggressive as he matured, recommending placement in a sanctuary. They said Luc had refused each time, insisting that Marcel was different, that their bond transcended typical human-chimp relationships. His goal was to document Marcel's entire life cycle, creating what he called a definitive portrait of interspecies family dynamics. That morning, he planned to photograph Marcel's reaction to a new enrichment toy, continuing a project he hoped would become his masterpiece. The farmhouse sat on 12 acres of oak and lavender fields, its thick stone walls providing cool refuge from the Provençal heat, while Marcel's custom-built enclosure connected to the main house through a reinforced door that had remained mostly unlocked for convenience, despite repeated warnings from authorities and veterinarians over the years. Male chimpanzees have powerful jaws capable of delivering one of the strongest bite forces among primates. They are highly territorial and can become extremely aggressive during adolescence and adulthood, particularly males establishing dominance. Chimpanzees attack by biting, striking with their hands, and using their superior strength to slam opponents against hard surfaces. Even chimpanzees raised from infancy retain wild instincts and can turn violent without warning, especially when they perceive challenges to their status or territory. Marcel had been displaying increasingly concerning behaviors over the past 6 months, charging at visitors, refusing commands, and showing possessive aggression over food and territory. The local veterinarian had visited twice in April, documenting Marcel's aggressive posturing and recommending immediate placement in a specialized facility. Again, Luc had dismissed these warnings, attributing Marcel's behavior to seasonal changes and stress from construction work on a neighboring property. Theo, now 16 and living with his mother, had stopped visiting after Marcel had cornered him in the bathroom during his last stay, though Luc rationalized this as playful behavior. That morning, Marcel had been agitated since dawn, pacing his enclosure and making aggressive vocalizations that Luc interpreted as excitement about the photography session. His home security footage appears to capture Luc entering Marcel's space, carrying his camera equipment and a puzzle feeder designed to challenge the chimp's problem-solving abilities. Marcel approached immediately, his hair slightly raised, a sign of arousal that Luc either noted but didn't consider threatening or didn't notice at all. The chimp grabbed at the feeder, and when Luc tried to position it for better lighting, Marcel yanked it away forcefully. Luc laughed and reached for it again, likely treating the interaction as play. Marcel's vocalizations grew louder, shifting from excited grunts to warning barks and screams, indicating heightened agitation. When Luc attempted to guide Marcel to a different position by placing his hand on the chimp's shoulder, Marcel spun around and fixed him with a direct stare, a clear dominance challenge that Luc failed to recognize. The attack began when Luc tried to retrieve his camera after Marcel knocked it to the floor. As Luc bent down, Marcel lunged forward with explosive speed, leaping onto Luc's chest and using his momentum to slam the photographer backward into the stone wall. Luc, caught off balance by the 80-pound force of muscle and bone, fell hard against the masonry. Before he could recover, Marcel's jaws clamped down on his face. With a combination of a crushing bite and a violent wrenching motion of his hands, the chimp shattered Luke's lower jaw and punctured his left cheek. Luke screamed and tried to push Marcel away, but the chimp's grip was immovable. Marcel shook his head violently, the motion tearing flesh and muscle from Luke's face. Blood splattered across the walls in close proximity as the chimp's teeth severed nerves and blood vessels. Luke's lower jaw hung at an unnatural angle, partially detached and bleeding profusely. When he raised his hands to protect his face, Marcel bit down on his right hand, crushing bones and cartilage. One finger was completely severed, while the others were badly mangled and degloved. The chimp released his grip only to slam Luke against the stone wall once more, then used dragging and throwing motions. Luke tried to crawl toward the door, leaving a trail of blood on the stone floor, but Marcel grabbed his legs and dragged him back. Marcel bit into Luke's neck, causing severe soft tissue trauma and major blood vessel rupture, leading to rapid exsanguination. Luke's movements became weaker as blood loss and shock took hold. His attempts to call for help produced only wet, choking sounds through his destroyed jaw and throat. The attack continued for several minutes, Marcel alternating between biting and striking until Luke stopped moving entirely. Luke's neighbor heard the screaming from his garden and immediately called emergency services at 10:47 a.m. The paramedics arrived about 15 minutes later, but could not enter the enclosure safely while Marcel remained agitated and covered in blood. Local police contacted a veterinarian who tranquilized Marcel, allowing medical personnel to reach Luke roughly half an hour after the attack began. He was transported to the hospital, but pronounced dead on arrival from massive blood loss and traumatic injuries that would have been fatal within minutes. The coroner's report listed the cause of death as exsanguination due to multiple traumatic injuries, including severe facial trauma with mandibular fracture, partial amputation of one finger, and fatal neck wounds severing major blood vessels. Marcel was euthanized by court order 3 days later, following veterinary and legal assessments that determined relocation was not feasible. Theo inherited the property, but sold it immediately, using the proceeds to fund his studies. The farmhouse remained empty for 2 years before being purchased by a family who converted Marcel's enclosure into a wine cellar, erasing the last physical evidence of Luke's fatal experiment in interspecies family life. Thanks for watching. If you liked these stories, click here